Yeah, so what happens if verbal abuse no longer works in society? What happens if people are no longer afraid of being called racist or Islamophobes or xenophobic or sexist or part of the war on women? Or like, what happens? What the hell happens in society if we have a dialogue free of verbal abuse? What happens if verbal abusers have to shut the living fuck up and let intelligent people with reason and evidence have an adult conversation? What happens if the verbal abusers are revealed as petty, nasty, vicious, ugly little trolls? And people actually have an intelligent decision based on reason and evidence, based on facts, based on biology. Actually have reasonable and intelligent discussions free of the fascist tyranny of verbal abuse. Free of, imagine if people could have a conversation about immigration with no fear of being called racist, with no fear of being called Islamophobic, with no fear of being called whatever, right? Or imagine if men and women could have discussion about male and female issues without misogyny and patriarchy and cisgender scum or whatever it is. Imagine if people could have conversations about gays and straights without the sword of Damocles of verbal abuse hanging over their heads, into a society that has had 2 or 3 generations of vicious verbal abuse defining almost all public discourse, right? And that is terrifying. It is absolutely terrifying for the verbal abusers that their verbal abuse might not work. What happens if your gun just goes click, click, click? Well, you are out of power. And the power in the world is not guns, but language. At the moment. And I'm not saying it should be guns. I'm just saying right now, the real power in the world is language. The real conformity, the real fascism, the real brutality, the real carved channels of power follow syllables, not fists, is verbal abuse. And verbal abuse is one of these things like when you just wake up and shake it off, it's like, oh, it's just vicious idiots making noise. Because it's such a vicious double standard. It's such a vicious double standard. Ridiculous double standard. And it's so in your face that the hypocrisy, manipulation, and bullying and verbal abuse of the mainstream media towards anybody, even remotely to the right of Lenin, is become so obvious now. And verbal abuse works until it doesn't.